They hadn't spoken a word or eaten a full meal in 2 years. Not since the crash that stole their mother, and something far more invisible, from them. In a mansion filled with silence, power, and grief, the Carter twins became little ghosts in designer dresses. Nanny after nanny failed to reach them. Therapists walked away baffled. Then came Anita Grace, a woman with no clear past, no glowing credentials, and a song in her voice the girls somehow remembered. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The Carter estate sat at the edge of Windmere Hills, a sprawling architectural marvel of glass, marble, and precision landscaping. From the outside, it looked like a magazine cover, pristine, controlled, untouchable. But inside, the walls held a kind of silence that even money couldn't hide. Alexander Carter stood in his home office, back turned to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the manicured lawn. He was on a video call, suit immaculate, voice steady, giving orders that moved millions of dollars with a sentence. He was the kind of man who answered questions with numbers and built empires while others were still planning breakfast. But when the call ended, and the screen went dark, Alexander didn't turn around. His hands dropped to the sleek mahogany desk. He stared at the reflection in the black screen for a long beat. For a man worth nearly $1 billion, he looked defeated. A knock at the door broke the silence. It was Susan, the live-in house manager. Early 50s, loyal to a fault, and always the one to deliver the news no one else wanted to. She cleared her throat gently. She quit, sir. Alexander didn't respond right away. He exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. That's the 4th this year, he said without turning around. 5th, technically. Mrs. Carmichael only lasted 11 days. Susan corrected him gently. Alexander finally turned. His sharp features were drawn today, a shadow of stubble beginning to cross his usually clean-shaven jaw. Did she say why? She said she couldn't take the silence. Said it was like working in a haunted house. His jaw tightened. They're children, he muttered, almost to himself. Not ghosts. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. Down the hall, beyond the grand staircase and past a pair of heavy oak doors, the Carter twins sat side by side on a velvet chaise in the sunroom. Nia had her knees tucked to her chest, her face half buried in a stuffed bunny with one missing eye. Maya, barely distinguishable from her sister save for the single braid over her right shoulder, was tracing circles with her finger on the frosted glass. Neither spoke. Neither had spoken in nearly 2 years. When Susan entered quietly with a tray, grilled cheese, tomato soup, and strawberries cut into heart shapes, the girls didn't even blink. You girls need to eat something, darlings, she whispered, keeping her voice warm, gentle. She placed the tray on the small table between them. Nia turned her face slightly, but not toward the food. Maya didn't move. Susan's heart ached. She'd been here long before their mother's accident. She had held them as babies, watched them take their first steps. She'd seen how they used to light up when their mom, Clara, would twirl them in the garden in matching sundresses. But now it was like the girls were locked in a fog no one could reach them through. She adjusted their blankets, then quietly slipped back out. That night, Alexander stood outside their bedroom door, listening. No giggling. No whispering. No music box playing. Just silence. He walked away without going in. In the kitchen, he poured himself a scotch and leaned against the marble Nyand. His eyes fell on a photo on the counter. Clara, holding the girls at age 3. Her smile was real. Effortless. Something he hadn't seen in his own reflection in a long time. He hadn't grieved properly. Couldn't afford to. The media had pounced on the tragedy like vultures. CEO's wife dies in car crash under mysterious circumstances. Conspiracies. Speculation. But none of it mattered compared to the wreckage it left behind in the home. Especially in his daughters. He pulled out his phone and opened the email from the agency. One more nanny scheduled to arrive in the morning. An unusual referral, no name he recognized. Some new candidate from a boutique agency in Portland. No social media. Sparse resume. But the recommendation came flagged as highly suitable. He didn't care anymore. If she could get the girls to speak, to eat, to smile, she could have a blank check. At 7:30 the next morning, a black town car pulled up the drive. Inside the sunroom, Nia looked out the window, clutching her bunny. Maya followed her sister's gaze. A woman stepped out, wearing a navy coat, hair pulled into a messy low bun. No makeup. No designer handbag. Just a leather-bound journal in one hand and a crooked smile that didn't seem forced. The girls didn't move. But for the first time in 2 years, they watched. The doorbell didn't chime. It rang like a cathedral bell, deep, resonant, and faintly inappropriate for 7:30 in the morning. Susan had just poured her first cup of coffee when she heard it. She sighed, wiped her hands on her apron, and made her way through the wide, echoing foyer, heels clicking against polished stone floors. She glanced at the antique grandfather clock as she passed it. 7:32 a.m. Right on time. She pulled open the double doors. The woman on the porch looked nothing like the other candidates. No sleek resume portfolio. No wheeled suitcase of teaching tools. No stiff smile rehearsed in the mirror of a hotel bathroom. Instead, she stood calmly in a weathered navy trench coat, her dark hair loosely tied, a soft, olive-toned scarf wrapped once around her neck. Her boots were worn but clean. In her hand was a leather journal, its corners curled, edges gilded with age. Her presence was neither meek nor forced. It was quietly certain. "Miss Anita Grace?" Susan asked, arching a brow. "That's me," the woman said with a nod. Her voice was low and even, like warm water over stone. "I'm Susan, house manager." She stepped aside. "Come in. Mr. Carter is expecting you." Anita nodded once and stepped into the foyer, her eyes scanning the space, not with awe, but with familiarity. Like she'd been there before, even though Susan was sure she hadn't. "You've been briefed on the situation?" Susan asked, motioning her down the hallway. "I've read the file," Anita said. "But I don't believe in files. People are not pages." Susan glanced at her. Anita smiled faintly. "No offense to your documentation." "None taken," Susan muttered, trying not to roll her eyes. Alexander was seated in the sitting room, a rare departure from his office. He didn't rise when they entered. He was dressed casually for once, in a dark sweater and slacks, though the Rolex still peeked out from beneath his sleeve. "Anita Grace," he said. "Yes," she said, stepping forward. "Mr. Carter." There was a long pause. "You were referred by a boutique agency," he said. "One I've never used before." She nodded once. "Your resume is unconventional. I don't work well with convention." Another pause. His eyes narrowed. "Why take this job?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Because they need someone who will see them, not fix them." Alexander tilted his head slightly. "Are you a therapist?" "No." "A child psychologist?" "No." "Then what are you, Miss Grace?" "I'm someone who listens before she speaks," she replied softly. And sometimes that's enough. For a man who controlled boardrooms with his gaze, Alexander found himself momentarily disarmed. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't afraid of him. And she wasn't selling anything. He nodded slowly. "They're in the sunroom." She looked at Susan. "I'd prefer to go alone." Susan hesitated, then looked to Alexander. He gave a short nod. "Let her." The sunroom was flooded with light when Anita entered. She didn't knock. She didn't announce herself. She simply opened the door and stepped in, as if she belonged there. The twins were where they always were. Nia curled into her bunny, Maya drawing invisible shapes into the window pane. They didn't look up. Anita walked to the center of the room and sat cross-legged on the rug. Not too close, not too far. No clipboard. No introductions. She pulled the leather journal into her lap, opened it slowly, and began to hum. It wasn't a song they recognized, yet it felt familiar. Not the tune, but the rhythm. Like bedtime. Like safety. Nia's eyes flicked over. Then away. Maya blinked. Her hand stopped moving. Anita didn't look at them. She kept humming. After a moment, she opened the journal and began to speak, not to them, but aloud. There once were two sisters who lived in a glass castle, she said softly, tracing her fingers over invisible words. They did not speak to anyone, not even each other, because their voices were tucked away in a secret jar. A jar only they could find, if they listened closely enough to the quiet between the trees. Silence. Nia slowly shifted in her seat. Anita kept reading. Every morning, the sun tried to speak to them in gold, and every evening, the moon tried to listen in silver. But the sisters said nothing, until one day a knock came at the castle door. She paused. Maya's eyes moved to her. What was behind the door? Anita asked, still not looking at them. No answer. That's okay, she whispered, closing the book. Some stories need time to finish themselves. She rose without another word, smiled toward the window, and walked out of the sunroom, leaving the scent of lavender and mystery behind her. Back in the hallway, Susan raised a brow. That was brief. It was enough for today. Alexander was watching from the far end. Did they speak? No. But they listened. And that's progress? For them? Anita asked. It's everything. She turned toward the guest wing. I'll take the small room with the garden view, she said, as though the decision had already been made. And just like that, Anita Grace became the only nanny to walk into the Carter house without asking permission, and walk out still holding the girls' attention. The house had been silent for 2 years. But tonight, just before midnight, a faint hum drifted from the sunroom. And for the first time since Clara's funeral, the music box played again. The third morning came with a cold drizzle and a fog that wrapped the estate like a whisper. The Carter grounds, usually pristine and clipped to geometric perfection, felt softer somehow, like the weather itself was holding its breath. Anita woke before the sun. Her room was modest compared to the rest of the mansion. One queen bed, white walls, a simple writing desk, and a balcony that overlooked a patch of unkempt earth at the edge of the garden. She opened the doors and stepped outside barefoot, the air wet against her skin. Below her, the soil was untouched, rich, dark, waiting. She smiled faintly. They'd told her the girls didn't go outside anymore. That was about to change. By 8 a.m., the estate staff were whispering about her. Not in the cruel way, just confusion. She asked for seeds. Actual flower seeds. Said she wanted to plant a garden. Susan told the chef over coffee. She doesn't carry a phone, said Nora, the youngest maid. I've never seen her check it once. Not even to text. She doesn't ask questions, said the butler. She just listens. I said the weather might turn stormy, and she said, good. Then we'll know how the earth feels. What the hell does that mean? They didn't know how to feel about her. But one thing was already clear. The girls were changing. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But perceptibly. The food tray that usually returned untouched now came back half empty. Someone had taken 3 bites of toast yesterday. 2 strawberries were missing this morning. Even stranger, their positions in the sunroom had shifted. Instead of curling into themselves like porcelain dolls, the girls now sat near the rug, just inches from the place where Anita had told the story 2 days before. They didn't speak, but they waited. That afternoon, Anita brought in a small cloth bag and sat cross-legged in the same spot. She didn't say hello. She didn't offer toys. She simply placed a shallow clay pot between them, filled it with soil, and set 2 tiny seed packets beside it. Lavender and wild daisies. She didn't ask them to help. She didn't coax or plead. She just planted. And while she pressed the soil gently, she said nothing at all. Only when the last bit of dirt was patted down did she look up. Not at them, but toward the sun filtering through the clouds. The most patient things in the world, she murmured, are seeds. They don't ask the rain to come. They just believe it will. She stood and left. Behind her, Nia scooted forward, silently touched the edge of the pot with one finger, and then went back to her place. That night, the house was quiet. Dinner came and went. Alexander was late, as usual, caught in a brutal board call with investors. He barely looked at the roast on his plate. His thoughts were elsewhere. When he finally climbed the stairs and passed the girl's bedroom, something made him pause. The hallway was darker than usual, but not entirely silent. He leaned closer. Music. Soft. Warped. Barely audible. He opened the door slowly, careful not to wake them. Inside, the room was cast in golden nightlight. Nia was asleep, curled around her bunny. Maya lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Later that night, around 3 a.m., Anita sat on the floor of her room, cross-legged, a candle flickering in front of her. The journal lay open. Her pen hovered, unmoving. Her hand trembled slightly before she began to write. Day 3. Maya stared directly at me for 3 full minutes. Nia traced a spiral in the soil pot. They don't know they're healing yet. That's good. Healing should be invisible until it blooms. The music box plays again. I didn't touch it, but I remembered the tune. I don't know how. It's not in any of my songbooks. I thought I made it up. I'm not afraid of them. I'm afraid of what they've buried. Children don't go silent unless something scared them quiet. Something is still hiding here. She closed the journal, blew out the candle, let the darkness settle around her like a heavy quilt. The next morning, just before dawn, a voice broke through the stillness of the house. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clear. It was fragile. A whisper at most. Sing it again. It came from the sunroom. Anita, already seated near the clay pot, looked up slowly. Nia. She didn't move. She didn't look directly at Anita. But her mouth had moved. Her voice had cracked the silence. Anita didn't react with excitement or triumph. She simply nodded, turned a page in her journal, and began to hum. Softly. The same melody. And this time, the seeds weren't the only things listening. The morning after Nia spoke, the house felt lighter. Not louder. Not different in any visible way. But there was a shift, like the rooms had exhaled after holding in too many memories. Staff whispered less. Doors creaked open instead of being pushed tentatively. Even the air smelled different. Rosemary and damp soil drifting in from the garden. Anita stood outside on the balcony of her guest room, arms crossed, watching the fog slide off the Carter estate like silk. The garden below was still barren, save for the clay pot resting on the table under the window. A small wooden crate of seed packets leaned beside it untouched. The girls hadn't come outside yet, but they were watching. That was enough. Mid-morning, Anita wandered into the west wing, quietly, carefully. She didn't ask permission. She never did. Her instincts guided her, as they always had. Today, they nudged her toward the attic. The door was wedged behind a linen arm where no one had moved in months. It groaned when she pulled it open. The smell hit her instantly, cedar, dust, and something older, like forgotten perfume. She climbed the narrow staircase slowly, one step at a time. At the top, she paused. The attic wasn't lit by bulbs or skylights, just a single slice of sunlight pouring through a warped wooden shutter. Everything was still. Unopened boxes. A vintage crib frame. A rocking horse with one missing eye. A framed wedding photo of Alexander and Clara, glass cracked diagonally across her face. And in the corner, beneath a silk baby blanket, she found it. The music box. Cracked, its wood faded. Small and unassuming, like something you'd find at the bottom of an old nightstand drawer. But when she touched it, her fingertips tingled, cold, almost electric. She picked it up, turned it over. The winding key was stuck, rusted in place. No visible sound mechanism. Yet last night it had played perfectly. She cradled it in her palms, exhaling. And then, without winding it, she hummed the tune again, softly, barely audible. To her surprise, the box gave a faint vibration. A pulse, like it recognized the melody. She stared at it. "You're not just a keepsake," she whispered. "You're a memory trap." Downstairs, Alexander arrived early for once. He was dressed for comfort. White shirt, sleeves rolled, tie slung over his shoulder like an afterthought. Susan greeted him at the door. "They're in the sunroom," she said. "Both of them. Sitting with her." "Talking?" he asked quickly. Susan shook her head. "Listening." Alexander didn't press. He didn't want to shatter the fragile peace now drifting through his home like morning light. Instead, he poured himself a black coffee and wandered, aimlessly, almost without thinking, until he found himself at the base of the staircase to the attic. It was open. He frowned. No one went up there. Anita was still seated on the floor of the attic when he arrived. The music box rested in her lap, still and quiet. She didn't flinch when she heard his footsteps. "You found it," he said. She nodded. "That music box," he continued, stepping slowly into the room, was Clara's. She bought it in Florence. Hand-carved. One of a kind. Anita turned the box over in her hand again. "It still plays." He blinked. "That's not possible. It's been broken for 2 years. We tried to fix it. I didn't fix it. But it played." She nodded once. He crouched near her, elbows on his knees, trying not to look like he was unraveling. "That lullaby," he began. Anita met his eyes. "I used to hear her hum it to the girls," he whispered. "But I never knew the name. Never found it online. Clara used to say it came to her in a dream." Anita's voice was soft. "It came to me too." He stilled. "What do you mean?" "I've never heard it before. But the moment I saw them, it was in me. As if I knew it. Not just the melody, the meaning. Like it wasn't just a song, it was a bridge." He stood up abruptly, pacing. "Do you believe in that kind of thing? Past lives, energy transfers? Psychic memory?" "No," she said. Then added, "But I believe in children." He stared at her. "And I believe that trauma," she continued, "leaves fingerprints on everything. Objects, rooms, people, even music." Alexander looked away, suddenly overwhelmed. "I've failed them." "You protected them the only way you knew how," she said gently. "By trying to restore order." He looked at her again. "And you?" "I restore feeling." That afternoon, Anita placed the music box on the floor between the girls during their usual quiet time. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Maya crawled forward first, placing her small hands beside it. She didn't open it. Just sat there with it. Then Nia leaned into her shoulder. Still silent. But together. Their bodies closer than they had been in months. When Anita asked if they wanted to hear a story, neither moved. But neither pulled away when she started. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the living room walls amber, Anita noticed the edge of something peeking from behind a tall bookshelf in the nursery. She moved the shelf slightly and reached behind it. A leather-bound notebook fell into her hands. On the first page, in looping, elegant handwriting, "Clara Carter, notes, dreams, warnings." Anita's throat tightened. She flipped a few pages. There were entries, dates, little sketches of flowers. And then, on a torn page, a scrawl. "If anything happens to me, don't trust the man in the blue tie. He's always watching the girls. Always near them when I'm not." Anita closed the book. And for the first time since arriving, she felt fear. Because she remembered something. The day she arrived, a framed photo in the main hallway. Carter Enterprises staff photo. Rows of well-dressed executives. One of them front row. Wearing a blue tie. The journal didn't feel like paper and leather in Anita's hands. It felt like a heartbeat. She sat alone on the edge of her bed, the late afternoon light cutting long shadows across the floorboards. The notebook lay open in her lap, Clara's handwriting dancing across the pages. Elegant looping, laced with something deeper than thought. Fear. Anita didn't skim. She read every word. Clara had chronicled months of growing unease. Unexplained behavior in the staff, doors left unlocked, feelings of being watched, even when the mansion was empty. She had written about the girls sleepwalking. The bruises on Maya's arm that the nanny at the time dismissed as tumbles. The way Nia would suddenly cover her ears and whisper, "Make him stop." Clara didn't name names. But the man in the blue tie appeared often. Always just out of frame. Smiling in the background of birthday photos. Kneeling behind the girls in one of the holiday cards. His presence was recurring and silent, like a stain only she seemed to notice. "I think someone is trying to turn me into the problem," Clara wrote. "I'm forgetting things. Losing time. feeling heavy, like someone is making me unwell on purpose. If anything happens to me, it wasn't the accident it's made to look like. Anita closed the journal slowly. Something inside her shifted. Not panic, confirmation. Later that evening, Anita stood at the edge of the grand dining room, watching Alexander from a distance. He was seated alone, wine glass full, meal untouched. A half-lit chandelier cast a warm glow across the long mahogany table. He looked like a man surrounded by everything and connected to nothing. She stepped into the room. "I need to ask you something," she said, voice firm but quiet. He looked up. "Of course. Clara. The day she died. What exactly happened?" He blinked, surprised by the directness. "She left the house around 3 p.m., he said. Said she needed space. Took the car. It was raining. Her tires slipped on a downhill curve. She hit a barrier. Died at the scene. No witnesses?" He shook his head. Only security footage showing her pulling out of the driveway. The rest of the street had no cameras. "And before she left, was she upset?" "Shaken." He hesitated. "We argued the night before. Nothing serious. Just the usual. About the girls. About how I was never home. But she wasn't hysterical. She was tired. Fragile. Did she ever express fear?" Alexander looked down at his wine. "Yes," he admitted. "But I didn't take it seriously. I thought she was just overwhelmed. Paranoid. That maybe the grief from her mother's death had caught up to her." Anita walked over and placed the journal on the table. "She wasn't paranoid," she said. "She was being watched." He opened it, eyes scanning the first few lines. As he reached the final warning, the line about the man in the blue tie, his expression changed. The blood drained from his face. "Anita, this handwriting, this is Clara's." "Yes." His hands clenched. "Why didn't anyone tell me about this?" "Because no one found it," she said. "It was buried behind the nursery bookcase." His eyes flicked toward the hall, as if expecting someone to leap out in protest. "They made her feel crazy," Anita said softly. "And it worked." Alexander leaned back, looking like he'd been hit. "My God," he murmured. "Ward." Anita didn't react. "I trusted him," Alexander said. "He handled Clara's estate paperwork after she passed. Helped me through everything. I invited him into my home after the funeral." "I know," Anita replied. "And now you think he's connected to this?" he asked. "I don't think," she said. "I know." She pulled out a drawing, Maya's, the one with the blue tie. He was in their lives constantly. Close enough to scare them. Never enough to be suspected. Alexander took the paper slowly, studying it. His throat moved once, swallowing something that wouldn't go down. "They were afraid of him. And they couldn't tell you," she said. "Because he stole their voices." Later that night, Anita walked the upstairs hall alone. The Carter estate, once so pristine and cold, now pulsed with a different kind of energy, unspoken memory. She paused at the painting of the family in the hallway, Alexander, Clara, and the girls. The background was the estate's garden in full bloom. And there he was again, Nathaniel Ward, off to the side, barely noticeable, wearing a crisp blue tie, one hand on Maya's shoulder. Anita studied his eyes. There was nothing unusual in his smile. That was the most disturbing part. Back in her room, she placed the journal carefully beneath the bed and lit a single candle on the windowsill. She sat down, eyes closed. The music box remained on the nightstand, closed and silent. She didn't need it to play tonight. The lullaby was now inside her. And the final verse had just begun. In the nursery, Maya woke up at midnight. She sat up in bed slowly, glanced at her sister, then at the window. She climbed out of bed, walked across the room, and pulled open the curtains. The moonlight spilled in. And in the distance, in the garden below, she saw her father. He was sitting alone at the edge of the planting bed, head in his hands, a man trying to become whole again. She didn't cry. She didn't call for him. She simply placed her hand against the window and waited. Because for the first time in her short life, she understood something. The truth wasn't just something you told. It was something you stood inside of quietly, until everyone else was ready to stand there with you. Alexander Carter hadn't slept in 2 days. He sat in his office with the journal open in front of him, Clara's words highlighted by the cold light of his desk lamp. The handwriting he once adored in birthday cards and love notes now stared back at him like a haunting. Accusatory. Final. Don't trust the man in the blue tie. He's always watching the girls. Always near them when I'm not. Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose, forcing back the pressure building behind his eyes. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. He didn't even notice. Across the desk, Anita sat silently, her face unreadable. The journal between them was now the evidence of a woman everyone thought had been unraveling. But she hadn't unraveled. She had seen something no one else had dared to look for. I should have seen it, Alexander said at last, his voice rough. I was right there. I just couldn't let myself believe it. You were grieving, Anita said. Grief dims more than vision, it dulls instinct. He looked at her. You think I ignored her on purpose? I think you were surviving the only way you knew how, she said gently. Through distraction. Through control. Alexander stood up, moved to the window, and stared out over the lawn. The sun was beginning to set. A golden spill of light stretched across the grass, where the girls sat with Susan near the flower beds, quietly painting. They remember more than they're saying, he muttered. I can see it in their eyes. They remember everything, Anita replied. They just haven't found a safe way to say it yet. That evening, Anita brought out the drawing pads again. She didn't ask them to talk. She just sat in the garden with the girls, a basket of markers and crayons laid out between them. Can you draw someone you don't like? She asked casually. Just shapes. Colors. No faces. Nia's hand twitched. Maya stared at the grass. Then slowly they began to draw. Maya started with a tall shape, rigid, thin, long limbs. She used blue for the tie again. A heavy blue, too dark for the sky. Nia drew a house. Not their mansion. Smaller. Off-kilter. With one eye looking out of a window. Then she took a black crayon and scribbled over the figure. Heavy strokes. Unblinking. Anita watched, heart tightening. She let them finish in silence. Then she asked one question. Do you trust me to tell your father what you can't say? Both girls nodded. Back inside, Alexander reviewed the drawings. He didn't say a word for a long time. They know, he whispered. They've always known, Anita said. They just didn't know you were ready to believe them. He looked up. Something unspoken passed between them. A father finally waking up, and a woman who had stood quietly beside the storm long enough for him to find his feet. What do we do? He asked. We give the truth a voice, Anita said. Their voice. The next morning, Alexander summoned his private security chief and gave a direct order. Get me the old server backups. Every internal camera feed. From the month before Clara's crash. You know legal won't like that, the guard warned. Especially if. I'm not interested in who's comfortable, Alexander interrupted. I want the truth. By afternoon, he had it. Buried in archived drive footage was a time-stamped clip from a hallway outside the girls' playroom. 3 weeks before Clara's accident. Nathaniel Ward. Bent at the girl's door. Listening. Whispering. He wasn't holding anything. But the way he positioned himself, blocking the camera's view of the door handle, was deliberate. In another clip, Clara stepped back into frame from her studio. Nathaniel appeared behind her in the corridor, watching her with the stillness of someone studying prey. She never turned around. Alexander stared at the paused footage. His oldest friend. His daughter's godfather. The man who'd walked into their grief like a shepherd, calm, composed, always helpful. Now revealed as something else entirely. He picked up the phone. Nathaniel arrived that evening just after 6. He wore a blazer and his signature polished blue tie, hair slicked, smile intact. Alex, he said as he entered, clapping his hands together. You look like hell. Alexander forced a smile. Long week. Nathaniel gestured toward the garden. How are the girls? Heard they've finally come around. Must be that new nanny. What's her name again? Anita? Yes. She's been remarkable. Glad she could do what the rest couldn't, Nathaniel said. His smile stayed, but his eyes flickered, watchful. Alexander led him to the study. The lights were dim. The music box was sitting on the desk, beside the journal, and two childlike drawings of the blue-tied man. Nathaniel's gaze moved between them. Something in his expression cracked. Just for a second. This some kind of show and tell? No, Alexander said evenly. This is a confrontation. Nathaniel laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're joking. You were always in the background, Alexander said. Always there. Too helpful. Too present. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. I've done nothing but clean up your mess since Clara died. Did you touch them? Alexander asked, the words sharp, shaking. Did you ever touch my daughters? Nathaniel went still. Careful, he said low. That's a dangerous accusation. Anita entered the study then, silent as breath. Behind her, two security guards stepped into view. Nathaniel Ward, the taller one, said, You're being detained for questioning. Nathaniel's composure cracked completely. Alex, you can't be serious. This woman has brainwashed you. Look at her. You don't even know who she is, where she came from. I don't need to, Alexander said. Because for the first time since Clara died, my girls are safe. And that didn't happen until you were out of their shadow. Nathaniel didn't shout. He didn't struggle. He just laughed once, low and bitter, and let himself be escorted out. His final words were aimed at Anita. You're not done here. You just think you are. Later that night, the mansion was quiet again. But not the kind of quiet that smothers. It was the kind that lets the past exhale. Anita stood outside the nursery door, listening to the faint sounds of the girls giggling over their sketchbooks. No ghosts. No watchers. Just childhood returning. Alexander approached from the hall, his steps slow, his face unreadable. She said I wasn't done, he muttered. You're not, Anita replied. But now you can begin again. He looked at her. Stay. Anita didn't answer right away. She turned back to the door. She could hear Maya singing softly. A broken melody once forgotten. Now whole. It started, as healing often does, without fanfare. No dramatic moment. No storm. Just a warm morning light that broke across the Carter estate like a secret being told for the first time. The mansion, once echoing with absence, now hummed with small signs of life. A window left open, sheer curtains fluttering like sails. Crayon sketches taped to the fridge. The faint scent of lavender and baked cinnamon drifting from the kitchen. Laughter, small and unsteady, leaked through hallways that had once swallowed even the sound of footsteps. Something had changed. Not just in the house. In the people inside it. Alexander stood barefoot on the balcony outside his bedroom. His tie was gone. His shirt sleeves were rolled up. A cup of warm tea, not coffee, rested in his hands. Below him, the twins danced across the garden path, shoeless, hair wild, each holding a pinwheel they'd made from old scrapbook paper. They were laughing, not giggling, not that hollow, forced imitation of joy he'd seen in so many therapists' offices. This was real, full-bodied, untamed, and alive. He let the steam from the tea curl into his face. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was choking. Anita was kneeling at the edge of the garden, hands deep in the soil. She wore a linen apron, her hair tied back with a silk scarf one of the girls had insisted she borrow. Her fingers were dirty. Her smile wasn't. Beside her, the lavender she'd planted weeks ago had bloomed. Its color matched the ribbon now tied around Nia's wrist. Maya handed her a small pot. This one's named Clara. Anita paused. She met Maya's eyes. The girl smiled, soft, proud, like a secret she'd just learned to carry in the open. Clara would have liked that, Anita said. She does, Maya replied. I talk to her sometimes. In my room. Anita didn't ask what Clara said back. Some things didn't need proof to be true. That afternoon, Alexander did something unthinkable. He turned off his phone. Not silenced. Not muted. Off. He brought out a board game Clara had once bought for the girls, still unopened. It had sat in a closet for 2 years. Covered in dust. Still shrink-wrapped. He unwrapped it himself and set it up on the terrace table. "Want to teach me?" he asked them. Nia glanced at Maya, then at Anita. "You don't know how?" she asked, skeptical. Alexander grinned. "I'm not very good at being a kid." Maya climbed into her chair. "We can help." Nia smirked. "But if you cheat, we'll know." He raised his hands. "Deal." Anita sat nearby, pretending to read, but watching, always watching. She didn't need to participate. She had already played her part. Now it was their turn to lead. That evening, as the sun sank low behind the orchard trees, the family gathered for dinner on the back patio. It was a simple meal. Chicken stew, fresh bread, sliced peaches from a neighbor's farm. But it felt like a feast. The girls took turns pouring lemonade. Alexander let them argue over the last piece of cornbread. Anita laughed when Maya snuck an extra helping onto her plate and tried to hide it under a napkin. No one mentioned the past. No one needed to. It was here, yes, but it was no longer a wall between them. It had become something else, a floor beneath their feet. Later, Anita stood in the nursery. The windows were cracked open. The music box rested on the shelf, untouched but clean, polished by tiny hands. A soft breeze stirred the curtains. The girls were asleep, not curled up like frightened animals anymore, but stretched out peaceful, arms thrown over pillows like they had room to dream, room to be unafraid. Alexander appeared at the door, resting against the frame. "She hasn't had a night terror in a week," he said quietly. "Neither of them." Anita nodded. "You did that," he said. "No," she said. "They did. I just reminded them how." He stepped into the room, looked at his daughters, then at her. "I've thought about what you said," he murmured. "About not becoming their crutch." She turned to him. "I still want you to stay," he said. "Not as staff, not as someone hired, but as someone we choose." He paused. "I choose you. They already have." Anita didn't speak right away. Then she smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." Weeks passed. The season shifted. And one night, under a full moon, the Carter estate held a different kind of sound. Not silence. Not ghosts. Not grief. But music. Soft, out-of-tune singing. Two little voices, brave and imperfect, threading lyrics from a lullaby long buried in memory. Anita stood outside their door, one hand on the frame. She didn't cry. She closed her eyes and listened. In a mansion once defined by silence, two voices rose like light breaking over water. Not because they were forced, but because someone waited long enough for them to return. And this time they stayed.